All right, welcome everyone to our webinar with Our Islands, Our Future. We're here to talk about a current situation that's near and dear to both our coasts, Florida and the Bahamas. So we have a really talented panel here um, and to discuss this issue. And we're talking about oil drilling that's going on right now in the Bahamas. Well, there's been a slight update. There was a drill that was just capped, but future operations are still likely to happen or possible to happen, and we're here to discuss that. My name is Reinaldo Diaz. I am your Lake Worth Waterkeeper, and like all waterkeepers, we represent a particular watershed. Ours is the Lake Worth Lagoon, which is essentially the eastern coast and all of Palm Beach County from Lake Okeechobee all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So you might be wondering, why would Floridians be interested in this topic? Well, you're going to learn from the experts and from us here soon. The first drill, the first offshore well that took place was a mere 150 miles from Florida's coast. And to put that into perspective, we all remember Deepwater Horizon from a little over 10 years ago. That drill, when that accident happened, that platform was 130 miles from Pensacola. And we all know, after spilling nearly 5 million barrels of oil, after months of struggling to cap that well, all of Florida felt an impact. The west coast of Florida felt an environmental impact. The east coast of Florida, we felt impact to our economy, our tourism. So we all have a stake at this. And it's unprecedented that the Bahamas has to endure oil drilling. And on top of that, it's, so near to both our coasts. It's at the base of the Gulf Stream current. So there's some potential serious risk to both of us on many fronts. And so there's going to be a call to action. So pay attention to comments. We're going to post links. We're voicing our opposition on behalf of Floridians using a letter which is addressed to the Prime Minister Minis, and we're respectfully demanding that he does not allow future offshore drilling in Bahamian waters, as well as opening up transparency to what just happened with the drill that was just capped. And that letter will be signed by 3 groups of stakeholders. We're looking for other environmental non-government organizations. So if you represent any kind of nonprofit or any kind of organization that is concerned and has a stake for the environmental or economic impact of Florida, you might want to sign on to this letter. We're also looking for municipal governments. So if you're a municipal government official, especially on the east coast of Florida, think Martin County and down, if there's a spill, we would all be affected. And so you might want to consider joining on this letter. And then a third stakeholder is going to be big businesses. If you're a Floridian business, especially if you're in hospitality, tourism, if you're a fishing guide, fishing products manufacturer, boat builders, there's so many in our area that could be affected by this because there's going to be these impacts if there's a potential accident or tragedy. I know many who are probably listening on to this webinar, you can relate. If you grew up in this area, I know where I'm at right now in Lake Worth, a short boat ride over from West End. And part of our culture, part of Floridians' culture, especially on this coast, is going back and forth, doing the fishing, doing the diving, because we share these waters, we share this Gulf Stream. Similarly, marine life shares that water, right? We know that our wahoo that we catch off of Florida, they're breeding, they're reproducing in Bahamian waters. An interesting project, a good friend of ours, they run American Shark Conservancy. They study the impacts to offshore-based shark fishing off of our coast. So our good friends at ASC, they tagged great hammerhead sharks that they caught off our beaches here in our watershed. Well, just this week, one of their satellite tags was pinging off of Andros in the Bahamas. So they're just linked, clearly linked. Our wildlife, they go back and forth just like our people. And so we all have a stake at this, and we all should be voicing our opposition to these projects. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let our esteemed panelists start introducing themselves. I guess we could start with fellow rock star Waterkeeper, Rashema Ingraham. She's kind of a badass in the Waterkeeper movement, and we all love her, and we're happy to have her. So if you want to introduce yourself, Rashema.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Rashema Ingram with Waterkeepers Bahamas, and Waterkeepers Bahamas is the umbrella organization for Grand Bahama Coastal Waterkeepers, Bimini Coastal Waterkeepers, and Western Clifton Bays in New Providence Waterkeepers. And so we have a very wide and diverse group of waterkeepers who really believe in preserving clean water for present and future generations. We are happy to be a part of the movement. We also have water monitoring programs on all of the islands, and we focus on teaching adults and children to swim. So those are some of our things, along with being aggressive with the government to make sure that there is preservation for our marine ecosystems for the future. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Davis.
Hi, good night, everyone, and thanks for having us. I am Dr. Ancelino Davis. I am a native Bahamian researcher. Primarily, I do ecology and capacity building. So I teach Bahamians how to both study our environment as well as talk about it and communicate with regards to that. I have the interesting history of having been on that response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill for the Bahamas. And so I was one of the scientists that not only had to go over there to investigate the marine and terrestrial environment before any oil came, and we expected us to get some oil from that. But having that opportunity to see underwater as well as on land gives me a totally different perspective, I think, from a lot of other scientists. And I've been working in the environment in the Bahamas since about 2000. So Deepwater Horizon was like halfway between when I started and today when we're having to go through this silly fight about oil drilling in the Bahamas again. And I also had the opportunity of trying to recruit Bahamians to actually engage in that research. And so I am very familiar with the difficulty of actually finding the capacity in country and capacity not only to recognize our local species and collect scientific data, but also to deal with oil-related, the chain of custody and things like that when you're responding to an oil spill. And so that's a big challenge. And lastly, unfortunately, I also had to support the Hurricane Dorian response in the Bahamas. And so being familiar with the mapping capacity that we lack in country, the coordination and logistic facilitation issues that we have, it gives me a really intimate understanding of how unprepared the Bahamas is for an oil spill disaster, and also what we have to lose if we do have something like that. And I would like to pass it on to Erin.
Good evening. I'm Erin Polster. I'm a scientist at the University of South Florida's College of Marine Science, and I've been involved with studying the impacts of the Deepwater Horizon for the past 10 years. We also did a Gulf-wide survey, so we used the RV Weatherbird and circumnavigated the Gulf to collect samples, sediments, water, and fish to compare the impacts of Ixtoc oil spill back in the 70s to the Deepwater oil spill in 2010. We're still studying the impacts and anticipating to do so for quite some time. So I will give some of what we've learned on Deepwater Horizon impacts and fisheries. Now, Dr. Rogers.
Yeah. Dr. Rogers, William Rogers at Texas A&M University. I'm at West Texas A&M, which is one of the branch schools. My specialty is environmental toxicology. We maintain the ecological risk database for the state of Texas. It's a web-based software, which I probably need to do a webinar on so you all could use it. I spent 15 years working on that with TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I'm the Environmental Science Program Director here for our program, and I have quite a bit of experience in oil cleanup litigation. We were actually helped the parishes after the Deepwater Horizon event. Several of the parishes needed assistance in preparing their claims and damages, so we actually got with the SCAT teams, recovery teams, and prepared their damage assessments so they could participate in some of the recovery programs. I was actually there on the ground during the response on the coastal areas in Louisiana as well as Texas, and got to see firsthand both the booming, the recovery activities. I looked at the effect of booming. By the way, I do conduct a short course in oil boom deployment. So something I've had some experience in when I was I used to be with the Department of Interior, and I was part of the national response team there in working with basically all of the southern states for response in the event of a spill. Then I also worked with the World Bank and the UN on environmental issues. One of those was probably one of the largest oil remediation projects in Azerbaijan, and then also one of the largest mercury spills, which was we recovered 1,000 metric tons of mercury before it entered the Caspian Sea, and also worked on oil issues, legacy oil issues in that area. But anyway, and I also reviewed the EMP for the BP offshore drilling permits, and that was kind of a long, arduous task, but prepared that. So that's just a short description of what I do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. There's going to be a lot to learn, so we'll get right into it. So I think we should start maybe with Rashema, if you want to catch us up on the history of how this happened, what went on, and where we're at right now. Oh,
We'll do that. First thing I will do would be to share my screen. If I can. And let me see how that's going to work. Okay, I think we should be good to go. Just have a few slides. I really want to be able to talk with you about what's happening. So I first of all want to say thank you to Lake Worth Waterkeeper for being able to provide this platform for us to talk about this issue, to talk about the campaign, and talk about our steps moving forward. Things that we need to do as a Bahamian economy or a community, as well as things that should stand out to Floridians and ways that they can be a part of this campaign as well. And so this is my opening slide, and this was just one of the images that we used when we launched our campaign. And so the steering committee members of Our Islands, Our Future are members of BREEF, which is Bahamas Reef Education and Environmental Foundation, Waterkeepers Bahamas, and Waterkeeper Alliance. And we really knew that there was a need to move forward with an aggressive campaign. And so we launched Our Islands, Our Future in spring of 2020. And so even though we were all just first introduced to the COVID-19 lockdown, and we were trying to figure out a way how to adjust our lives and our work ethics to be able to accommodate COVID-19, we were thrust into developing a strong public relations campaign to bring light to the issue of oil drilling possibly happening in Bahamian shores. And so we got the ball going, and one of the first things that we did was to begin a petition on change.org. And initially, we were a little bit panicked with the response that we would have been getting from the change.org petition, but these are some of the numbers from just today. We almost have 100,000 persons that have signed that petition asking the Prime Minister of the Bahamas to consider a ban on existing licenses as well as a permanent moratorium on offshore drilling in the Bahamas. And this was a recent update calling again for this ban and moratorium, because we know that there were many drilling exercises that would have happened in the Bahamas beginning from the mid-1940s. And we also know that all of those drilling wells were capped. Yes, they were. And so we should learn from history that it's nothing to really consider when you look at what's at risk for the Bahamas. We know that the Bahamas is definitely a tourism industry, that it thrives off of tourism. We have a rich, diverse, and vibrant marine ecosystem. And so from the mid-1940s to now, we're happy to say that there are no active wells to date, and we're hoping that the Prime Minister of the Bahamas will now use this opportunity to put a complete ban on all offshore drilling in the Bahamas. So we would love to see that this number increase, and we need the support of Floridians, people from all around the world, as well as Bahamians who would have not signed that petition already. And so again, there's the website, stopbahamasoildrilling.com. I believe we can really band our voices together and really get the Prime Minister moving on that change. So if I am able to share this video, it's only a 30-second video. It was originally a 2-minute video that we had circulating on our social media platforms about the work that was happening and some of the presentations that Bahamas Petroleum Company was presenting to its potential shareholders. And so we wanted to really put together a educational social campaign so that persons could know what was at risk. And so some of the key things that were pointed out in this 30-second video, and I will share the link later on for the complete 2-minute video, where the company really emphasized the fact that these are their rocks, and there was very little consideration for Bahamians or persons, Bahamians that thrive off of the ocean. We are an ocean nation, and so much of our culture is surrounded by our waters. So many livelihoods depend on our waters. And for there to be a total disregard for Bahamians, for others, tourists that really appreciate what we have, we needed to highlight that in this video. And so some of the things that were at risk, if I can get to that slide, let's see. Right. Oh, so what's at risk? And I'm sure that Dr. Davis is going to talk about this in his presentation. But if you were to look at the left image, the areas that are traced with white are either marine protected areas or proposed marine protected areas. And the areas in red are the drilling license areas that Bahamas Petroleum Company has in the Bahamas. And then you can see the yellow is the proposed area. And so, of course, we needed to emphasize the fact that we have a proposed drilling that was happening in 2020 that was so close and near to fragile systems that many fishermen depend on, that many marine animals, including dolphins, would pass by. And I also want to point out the fact that the Bahamas is in what we call the hurricane belt. So imagine having active oil wells or rigs in this area during an active hurricane season. But one of the things that we wanted the public to know was that you had 70% of Bahamians who are either employed by the tourism or fisheries industry. And so that's more than our population that's at risk. We have 400,000 Bahamians at average who are 70% dependent on clean, pristine waters. And for us to look at the annual revenue that's brought in by tourism or fisheries, you're looking at a $7.8 billion revenue stream that's coming in because we are surrounded by the ocean and we maximize on that positioning. And so if you look at the $7.8 billion, if you were to be able to quantify what would need to happen in terms of oil drilling that is expected to happen to be able to balance what tourism and fisheries bring in, looking at 880 million gallons, right? Or 88 wells around the archipelagic nation of the Bahamas. And so imagine that as your backdrop. You have turquoise waters, and then you have maybe 88 rigs in your background. And so that's something that we really wanted to point out, that we know what we have. We know that we can maximize on it. We know that we can become creative in the way that we provide products to our consumers. And we ought to be able to do that. Not only that, we have 360 days of sunshine. And so why not move towards renewable energies or solar or wind energy rather than the decaying or dying fossil fuels industry? And so one of the things that we really set out to do was to garner support not only from the 3 steering committee members, but from local businesses, global businesses, as well as nonprofit organizations or any business or group of people that wanted to join collectively with our voice to make a stronger positioning for our campaign. And so these are just randomly picked, but we have over 150 global and local supporters. And here are some of our supporters. And we welcome as many, even though, like Reinaldo said, we have a wonderful update. Our fight still continues, and we need as many supporters to be a part of the Our Islands, Our Future coalition. One of the things that we did, and I'm almost done, one of the things that we did initially was we pressed the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, and we wrote letters to him, as much letters as possible, beginning from July, letting him know exactly what our position was. In October, again, letting him know again that we have over 60,000 persons that have 40,000 persons that have signed the petition at that point. And we need you to listen to the voices of those petition signers. And then we wrote again as a global coalition, as a local coalition, to the Prime Minister, again, stating the fragile position of our marine life and the fact that oil drilling is not a Bahamian thing, and to reconsider that, and also to provide us with copies of the license agreements, of the permits, so that we can have a clear view of what's at risk. Are there any insurance policies that we need to pay attention to? And does the insurance policy cover any damages beyond just the traditional insurances? And I'm sure Dr. Rogers will talk about some of the the risk, because like he said, he was able to review that very heavy 2,600 page EIA and EMP, which again shows that there were so many things that were attempting to be hidden in the fine print. And so we were asking the Prime Minister over and over to provide us with information on the status of those agreements. And after we realized that we weren't getting anywhere fast enough, knowing that Bahamas Petroleum Company was set to contract the Stena Ice Max, which was not the original drill ship in their EIA, we began to shift gears to legal and to have a legal action commenced by Waterkeepers Bahamas and Save the Bays. And that was done in December. Quickly, we got leave or permission from the judge to proceed with that, because this was a judicial review. In order for it to be moved through the courts, it had to be given leave from the judge in order to proceed. And so we weren't looking at asking the company to provide that information. We were asking the government of the Bahamas to provide that information to really move towards being a transparent and a good governance administration. And so once we realized that it was slow in moving and the ship was coming, we moved to the court. One of the interesting things that happen, and it typically happens when we file these environmental judicial review proceedings, is that you would have the respondents use a mechanism or a scheme within the JR process known as application for security for costs. And unfortunately, they were able to convinced the judge to allow them to be heard on that application, and she ruled in their favor, where if we are to proceed with this judicial review prior to trial, Waterkeepers Bahamas and Save the Bays would need to deposit into the court $200,000 in order to proceed. And so that's where we are with the legal case. But like Reinaldo said, we have exciting news. Recently, Bahamas Petroleum Company said that they have abandoned the well and they've capped the well permanently. And this really gives us an opportunity to push again for a call for a moratorium on the existing license and a permanent ban on offshore drilling in Bahamian waters. And so our social media campaign continues. We still need as many persons to sign that petition. We need persons to also go onto our website, learn as much as you can. There's a vast amount of information on our website, including our press releases and newspaper articles. And so as we work towards progressing with the legal case with Waterkeepers Bahamas and Save the Bays, there are things that you can do. One of those things is signing the petition, and I'm going to turn it back over to Reinaldo. And if you have any questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Rashema. I think that's a perfect segue for Dr. Davis. But before we get there, I mean, you mentioned Hurricane Dorian, and that, you know, I don't want to make you relive that, but as Dorian was going over West End, I remember so vividly because I was in the Lake Worth Lagoon. I was at one of our living shoreline projects, and the storm surge was so great. The water was right to the top of our red mangroves, and it didn't even hit us. We were just taking the outer bands, and I was, you know, constantly checking that radar every minute, waiting for that 90-degree turn that was promised to us. And of course, by the time it did that, there was already an oil incident, which I'm sure Dr. Davis will take over and describe.
All right. Good night, everyone. I am going to take you through a bit of the perspective on the oil drilling in the Bahamas from kind of like a geographic perspective. Can you all see my screen now? Yes, all right. So I run Science and Perspective, and in my belief, everyone can use a little more science, but we all need more perspective. So there's a lot of information going around about oil drilling and what we're doing in the Bahamas in regard to that. But when you take into account the actual lived perspective of Bahamian
turtle
people,
nest on Key Sal.
That is unless someone's landing a small ATV.
A very small ATV.
that was in 2010 in response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We went to the Key Sal Bank and we found 18 turtle nests on this tiny little island of Key Sal. And now we're dealing with this Deepwater Horizon oils, this BPC oil drilling. So I just wanted to show our guests what the Bahamas is. The Bahamas is this chain of islands. And so what that means logistically is it's difficult to get between different islands, to take resources from one island to another, to get resources or support from outside the country, like the US. Even Cuba may come to help if there was a spill. But in country, all of our resources are pretty much on this island of Nassau over here. And to get to the Key Sal Bank in 2010, we actually had to take Defense Force boats around Andros to come down over there. And it took forever. And then when a storm came through, we had to abandon everything and kind of run back to safe harbor, because there isn't really any safe harbor over here. If there was something really bad that happened out there, to get the resources there and to help would be just logistically virtually impossible for our resources that we have. And so this is the BPC Deepwater Horizon, the BPC, I keep saying the Deepwater Horizon because they kind of conflate in my mind right now. But the BPC Perseverance oil well was here. And this is the Great Bahama Bank and the Key Sal Bank. And for most people, they just know those as, oh, those are the beautiful patches of ocean in the Bahamas that the astronauts see from space. But when you look at the Key Sal Bank, this also has some of the most productive conch areas, as well as we found lots of sea turtles there. It has one of the highest populations of nesting seabirds. So these are really sensitive species when it comes to oil and deep water pollution. The Andros West Side National Park is actually pretty much this entire west side of the island of Andros. And that's really important because that's 1.5 million acres of protected land and waterways. And Bahamians need that for bonefish, the crab population, the land crabs that we eat as part of our culture, and of course, just the pristine waters that we're known for. Can you imagine if one day the astronauts look down and this is all black? That would suck. But this Central Andros Creek system, this isn't just any old creek system. There's bonefish, shark, lobster, conch. All of these things are inside here. And this waterway actually goes straight through. So the water comes back and forth in there to the tongue of the ocean. And a lot of people just see Andros as one big island, but it's not. It's actually a network of smaller islands. And of course, BPC has other oil drilling and exploration licenses for this area up here, which brings it closer to Freeport, closer to Florida, and into this area with lots of other islands and people around it. I highlighted this western coastline of Andros because this entire coastline is only 205 kilometers. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill actually coated 2,000 kilometers of coastline in that 30 days. And that was with all of the resources that the US was able to throw at it. All of the resources that BP, British Petroleum, had to throw at it. BPC is a small player, but the amount of oil that they were expecting inside that reserve, that would have blown it out of the water, especially with the paucity of resources that we have to actually fight it. And of course, everyone knows where the Deepwater Horizon rig was, but I just wanted to put it into perspective how far away they were from your US coastlines. This is actually much further away than from these areas in Florida than the BPC Perseverance oil well is from our coastlines. So that's something that I wanted to show you all. And here is, again, that map that Rashema showed earlier of where this is the protected area on Key Sal. And you can see there's an overlap with actually 2 of BPC's license areas. And this is the northern license area that is actually really close to Florida and Grand Bahama, where, again, they just had an oil spill in Grand Bahama, but that was a terrestrial oil spill. And the worst part about it is we had a foreign entity that's storing oil in our country. And when the oil spilled, there were statements coming out saying that there were no wetlands damaged. And it took me less than 30 minutes to go and look at the map of the distribution of that oil, the images from the sky, and then look at just a simple Google Earth map and point out exactly where the wetlands were and the water resources. And yes, there are wetlands in that area, and historical wetlands as well as ephemeral wetlands that were impacted. And the big comment that went around on social media was when our Minister of Environment said that there were 3 birds and 1 goat impacted. And being an environmental scientist, having experienced those environments and knowing the difficulty and the logistics that are needed for you to actually do the research and say how many birds were there before and after and how many were impacted, that was really ridiculous to hear them say that. And you could hear the voice of someone who's damaged your resources telling you how much it's worth and how insignificant it is. And that really annoyed me. And it's part of the reason that I go so hard on things like this, because we don't really get that respect. But this is some new maps that the Nature Conservancy has put out. And it's really cool to see this live and be able to explore it. But here's the Key Sal Bank, and you can see the different distributions of habitat. And I like this because you can see that it's not just pretty water, it's not just white sand. Although those satellite images look really pretty, here you can see this is coral. That's a coral reef that's sweeping through there. And all of that is just a few dozen miles away from where the where the Perseverance oil well was being drilled. And all of this green, that seagrass is not just grass in the water. That's what your conch and your lobster live in. That's what your turtles eat. And the Bahamas is a sea turtle sanctuary. So why are we putting them at risk and also saying that we're protecting them? But you can explore these through the Nature Conservancy's website. And of course, we're looking at now what is the history of oil spills. These are the oil spills affecting U.S. waters, and NOAA has a great visualization of them, and you can see the size of this Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We don't even have this type of data in the Bahamas. This is a major problem. We don't have the infrastructure for collecting that data. We don't have the resources for sending people out to do that type of work. And we don't have the infrastructure for storing all that data in country and sharing it properly with our community. These are major problems. We have lots of people in country that are working to protect the environment, but we don't necessarily have those resources. And after you have Hurricane Dorian and then COVID, and you've pulled away all of these resources that we normally would have, which are still too little for us to achieve that type of response that we would have needed, it's a really scary situation to be in when your back is against the wall and you don't have anywhere really to turn. And Rashema already said it well, the BPC resources that they were promising at 500 million compared to 7 billion a year. And that was only after they started production. So they could have started spilling oil this year, and they're projecting starting production 5 years into the future. So anytime in there, you're risking our $7 billion tourism industry for up to 5 years before you start offering the Bahamas $500 million a year maximum. And they probably would not have even made that. So it's just a really stupid financial decision even, and that doesn't even take into account all the lives and livelihoods that you would be risking with that. There's lots of places to donate, and the Bahamas National Trust, of course, supports our islands, our future work. But the Bahamas National Trust, I do recommend, and I just run Science and Perspective. I'm an independent researcher, but I know that they all do really great work. And so if you can support them, make sure that you earmark your donations whenever you give to a 501c3, and you can specify that you want them to engage in more capacity building for natural resource protection from pollution like oil. And this is something that I always encourage people when they're passionate about something, give specifically. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I'd like to pass it on to Aaron. Oh, back to Reinaldo.
I'll take it. Yeah. I mean, even just last week, there's 2 ships that put, to connect this to everyone. Even another direct connection to Florida is 2 of the supply ships that are bringing this equipment to the Stina Ice Max and so on. They're actually coming to the port of Palm Beach, right into Lake Worth Lagoon, to load up on supplies to bring it over to the Bahamas. Because again, like Dr. Davis and Rashema pointed out, the Bahamas is not the US. It's not Florida or Texas or Louisiana. It's not a government that's ever taken on really any kind of serious oil drilling. So they didn't have anything. So they're basically starting from scratch. And even just a couple of weeks ago, when one of those ships was in the port and I went to go look at it and photograph it, it really highlighted just how not a big operation it was. It was definitely, a smaller crane, a smaller boat. And it's really, with something so serious, with such a big risk, to just kind of like half do the job is just unnecessary, especially when, the BPC is already admitting that so far it's not economically viable to even keep going after this. So speaking of risk, I think our next speaker, Doc Rogers, can fill us in.
Sure. I'll unmute that. Do you have my slides loaded, or do I need to share my screen?
If you could share your screen, or Mel can get it.
Let me see if I can see if this pulls up. Oops, wrong one. Hold on. Just a second here. Yeah, I'll just start. Can you see that okay? Is it good enough?
No, but if you could start, Mel could probably bring it up for you.
Okay. And so I reviewed the environmental impact assessment, and of course, I've had a long history in oil recovery, a lot of work in oil litigation, over 70 cases, I guess, on oil impacts on primarily on ecosystems. And so I looked at there are two documents. One was the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment, much like our U.S. NEPA document, EIS, and then the EMP, the Environmental Management Plan. And so my job, what I looked at was looking at that plan to see if it addressed the potential impacts on water quality, aquatic, seafloor habitat, aquatic species, and then to look at the spill prevention and response measured as compared to the U.S. and international standards, the effects of barite and drilling fluids on marine benthic life and higher life forms, and to consider whether the EIA met U.S. and international standards for cumulative impacts on the entire project. And I compared those to the environmental management plan or impact assessments guidelines used by the UN and the World Bank, which I've participated in on several of those. It's really eye-opening listening to everybody, and everybody's passionate about this. And I wanted to show just again the sites, the drill locations, and again the lease holdings. I didn't put the ones up here, but in its proximity to the Bahamian resources, and that's the first thing I looked at. And then I looked back, and I just want everybody to understand the magnitude of these spills and what happens. And one of the things that happened on the Deepwater Horizon is that one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. There was not a good transition of control on that project. And what happened is that you see that they used the Corixit, and we did some bench testing on Corixit using that underwater. And the challenge is when you clean up a site, you actually want the oil to come to the surface where you can actually use oil skimmers. And the strategy is to use skimmers. And for example, this site here, you could go and skim this material. The reason it has this red tint is because of the use of Corixit dispersant. And what you see is that instead of the oil coming to the surface, the oil was suspended and is also on the bottom of the area. I know I was in Louisiana a couple of months ago, and they said they found an oil patch, and it was like 60 yards by 40 yards wide, a mat of this mixed material. But the way a response typically would go is you would basically determine if you're going to do a burn. Typically, you're going to try to boom and contain, and then use oil skimmers to pick up that material. When you've gotten that done, then you fly over oil herders, and oil herders would then make the oil recoalesce so that you could go back in and reskim and recover that oil. And then once that is done, as a last resort, the last thing you do is spray dispersants on the soil to keep that oil from coalescing and to separate that material into and let Mother Nature take care of that problem. So knowing that that's typically the strategy, then I just pulled this one off just to show you that here is the Deepwater Horizon. It was only 42 miles from the Louisiana resources. I was actually in the field in these areas right here observing the oil coming on shore and the cleanup, and actually flying and looking at booming strategies. One thing I found was that the oil response plan that was developed by BP for this site was basically just a carbon copy of the one that they developed for the Exxon Valdez after that project, after they basically passed OPA, the Oil Protection Act. And they still had walruses and everything in this area that were in Alaska. And so this hadn't been thought out too well. It's real important that all this planning be done up front, not after the spill. One interesting thing on one of the previous slides is that if we had a spill at the BPC site, we would immediately encroach on 3 international boundaries, which creates a huge management problem and should be built in the organization and how those agencies would respond. And then I just pulled, this is out of their own report, which was kind of dismissed, but this just shows you, this is a spill of greater than 1/100th of a millimeter, 1/1000th of a millimeter. Bear in mind that even an oil sheen, less than 1/10 of drop of oil, a sheen on the water on the breast of a brooding duck will render the nest 97% non-viable, a study done on mallards. And so when people look at the volume of water, you clean it up and it looks pretty clean, but it still has impacts. And so what you can see is, what my concern is that this is, when you look at the probability, and this slide's not very good, I should have done a little bit better job. But
sorry to interrupt, but we can't actually see your slides. We're having a bit of a technical difficulty. So
can you pull up my slides? I sent them to you.
Yeah, we're unable to do that right now, but if you could be like descriptive of what you're seeing. Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom line is that let me hit share here just a second. Let me see, share screen. I'm trying to share the screen here. I'm not having much better luck either. Hold on here.
Click on the little image of your screen and then click the share. Your share button might be grayed out until you actually choose the screen that you want to share.
Okay, which shares that? I should have practiced this, I guess. Let me look. That's not the one I want. Now I don't have the screen. Hold on. Okay. Well, that's embarrassing. I can't seem to, hold on, maybe I could do it this way. Nope. Well, I'm just going to have to describe it. I don't know what the problem is. I can't seem to share my screen. But anyway, going back to the project site, we crossed those international boundaries. We have less than, before the material would reach Andros Island, the Bahamas, if you look at the basic currents, we have less than a day to 2 days. If you look at where the resources are coming from in the response action, they basically said that they're coming from Lake Fortune, which is basically a boat 33-hour boat ride before you can even get there. And then they referenced on the site that they would use their recovery, but the recovery was basically a watch, see, and spray dispersant on the site, and then do beach recovery. And I just don't think that was a suitable response, considering what we've heard before, as far as what we can do. The dispersant, spraying the dispersant, is only going to make the problem worse. Then, so they had the strategy. One is to monitor, and then most of the modeling was done on a 12,000 barrel spill, nothing like the 5 million that we expect in the amount of time that it would take to cap this well. The response then was, well, we will rely on the the Bahamian capability. And so I went and tracked that down, and basically that capability is really designed for in-port releases. And so their capability is about 150 barrels. So BPC just punted and said, well, we'll rely on the Bahamas resources, and with no organization at that point in time. So when you look at the amount of time that it would take to get there, and they said we can respond within 3 hours. That 3-hour response would be nothing more than an airplane flying over, dropping supplies, and maybe flying dispersants on the oil site. The other thing that I noticed is that it was very quiet on the assessment, is they didn't address what the impact of over 240 tons of drilling fluid and drilling mud on the seafloor in that area, and the movement of that material. So the other thing I noticed that on the Deepwater Horizon was that even though Coast Guard responding and putting out booms, there was no boom strategy. And so even though you were getting reports of, well, we put out X numbers of miles of booms, as I flew over the site, there was no strategy. People were just going out and hauling those out and they weren't strategically being placed to capture or protect sensitive areas. So what I did find was in the EIA and the EMP was a lot of excruciating detail on how the trash would be handled, how cooking oil from the stoves on the rig would be handled, and very little information on how a large scale spill would be handled. And even though their own modeling showed that those spills would reach sensitive habitats and even the coast of Florida within days, and yet they have no capability to respond or do any significant response in that period of time. Then when I went and looked at the company, their responder, and looked at their resources, they actually looked at the resources at their service port and their other port. And then when I did an assessment of the amount of buoys that they had, they certainly did not have the buoys that were there, and they would have to go to Europe to get those. So basically, the plan was based on, we're going to train our people, we've got good technology, and therefore the spill is a low priority. I looked at the Ixtoc spill, and you have to be very careful. When BP said that we could not have anticipated a spill of this magnitude, one has never happened like this, Ixtoc was just like it, the same blowout preventer, as it turns out, the same driller. And the reason they were able to say that is this site was just within the international boundary, and the Ixtoc was just barely out. So the bottom line is that a few miles, they should have understood what was happening. And again, this, especially with the international boundaries, if this spill takes place, we're going to have to deal with Cuba, Bahamas, the U.S. All of those things should have been outlined in those agreements in that EMP or EIA. And we spent all of our time addressing surveys that they did, the design, the electrical design, the positioning system, all of those things, and really not addressing the key issue, which the EIA should have addressed, which would have been a magnificent spill of the order of the Deepwater Horizon or Ixtoc or any of those. So anyway, that's what we looked at. We spent quite a bit. And the other thing they didn't identify, I couldn't evaluate the dispersant. And of course, they would say, well, we don't know what kind of dispersant we need until we determine what type of oil we have. And the bottom line is that, but there was no plan on evaluating those resources. And so what I thought that should have been in the EMP and the EIA would have been, if they were going to rely on Bahamian resources, a huge program to beef up those supplies and responses. And that was the whole intent of the Oil Protection Act, that you would have readily available resources for a spill response. And both documents were totally silent on that. And I believe that's almost a strategy to lose the reader, to be impressed by volume rather than content. But anyway, those were some of my opinions on the project and some of my concerns. And I agree with the other presenters that the risk, and I'm a risk assessor, the risk, you look at the severity and the probability, in my opinion, a very high probability and extremely high risk.
Thank you so much. So thank you for that, Doc Rogers. Before we go to Dr. Polster, we did have a question, which I think is a perfect segue to her. And coming from Tiffany, she asked about if the oil from the Equinor storage that was the result of Hurricane Dorian, if that had been cleaned up. And Dr. Davis pointed out that not all of it has been recovered. Some of it is still out there. And unfortunately, many of us, even on this side of the Gulf Stream, we saw the newspaper articles of some less than desirable contractors that took that oil and just chucked it into some mangroves and other sensitive areas. And as that oil remains in any quantity, we start learning the long-term effects, and that's exactly what Dr. Polster does, especially on the Gulf Coast. And Tiffany highlights here that the solution to pollution is dilution. I really hate to hear that, because we hear it a lot on the east coast of Florida because we have the Gulf Stream. And when it comes to things like cyanobacteria and Lake Okeechobee discharges, the Gulf Stream just carries it away, and then it's somebody else's problem. Well, we see where that it was on the map, those drill sites. If they spray dispersants and the Gulf Stream carries it away, it's just going to carry it away to our coast. And I think Dr. Polster will be able to take that on.
Hopefully my share screen will work.
Just make sure, not yet, just make sure you, when you click share screen, select the window that you want to share and then hit share.
Okay. The window, oh, I see. How's that?
Good to go.
Okay. So one of the biggest things that I would like to bring up is when we went out to try, after the oil spill, everybody wanted to know the impacts. And what many scientists found was that there was absolutely no baseline data. And baseline data is critical in order to compare the pre and post impacts. And they've been drilling, offshore drilling in the Gulf since about the 40s. So after 70 or close to 100 years of drilling, now we have no baseline data to compare and to kind of pinpoint sources. So we were tasked to go out after the oil spill to try and determine if there were impacts to most of the fisheries. We were looking at target species like red snapper and groupers, the environmentally and ecologically important species. And one, like I said, we didn't find any background data, baseline data to compare. And before Deepwater Horizon, the assumption was that fish can metabolize PAHs. So there's no need to worry about that, which is true. They can metabolize it. They have a metabolic system that's pretty close to our metabolic system, and they can quite efficiently metabolize PAHs and eliminate them from their body. But what happens is with chronic exposure, long-term exposure, it may start to build up in tissues. And in part of the metabolism biotransformation system, sometimes the metabolites are more toxic than the parent compound. And in oil, the PAHs, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, they make up a very small amount of oil, but they are considered the most toxic. And in addition, when it's going through the body and through the liver, there's a enterohepatic recirculation system that can, if it's not eliminated straight away, it can still go through the body and then increase accumulation and toxicity. And there's been many environmental, well, mostly laboratory studies on the impacts of PAHs, and those can consist of cardiotoxicity, genetic alterations, physiological abnormalities, and skin lesions. And what we did was we looked at both the liver, which is an indicator of long-term chronic exposure, and the bile, which is its aid in digestion. And that is a good short-term indicator, so acute exposures, days to weeks. So we can kind of basically see what's going on in the environment, either over a period of days, hours, or over a period of weeks, months, or years. And so we conducted a decadal study looking at the bile, which is that digestive enzyme that's attached to the liver. And this, we collected fish from all around the Gulf, Cuba, all the way around. And basically what you see in this map over here, can you see my arrow? This is actually the mean biliary PAH concentrations in about 2,500 fish that consists of about 92 species. And this top graph is naphthalene, which is a low weight PAH. And the highest concentrations in these fish is right around the DWH oil spill. We have some hot spots off of West Florida Shelf, the Yucatan Peninsula, and over here in the Northwest. This bottom graph is benzoapyrene, which is one of the most toxic PAHs. It's been associated with cancers in humans. And here we have, it's more, the hot spots are more associated with riverine input around the Mississippi River, the Rio Grande, this spot over here. There was some oil wells here. I should say these black dots here are all our sampling locations where when we circumnavigated the Gulf, we collected fish from all these locations. And what we found was that every single fish we analyzed had levels of PAHs. And this graph over here is just, it gives an example of all the fish, basically from pelagic to benthic. And the color coded over here is just to illustrate, they're color coded by habitat usage. So we have some pelagics like the yellowfin tuna, some benthic fish, golden tile fish, inshore fish, red drum, and then we have some reef fish like the groupers and snappers. And what you'll notice is that originally everybody would have made the assumption that the benthic species would have the highest concentrations of PAHs. And what we found was yellowfin tuna, who is a pelagic species, swims on the surface, had the highest levels. So our question now kind of has been, well, basically PAHs don't really hang around in the water column. They kind of bind to sediments and fall out of the water column. So very low detection of water or PAHs in the surface water. So the question is, where are these PAHs coming from, where these pelagic species are being exposed to them? And one of our hypotheses is that perhaps it's the produced water from the oil drilling. And then where are we? So some of the sublethal effects that we've seen. So a lot of people were kind of hung up on the, well, we need to see bodies to calculate the impacts, but it's not always lethal impacts. And what we've seen over time is some abundance declines in red snapper over time. This is from 2006 to 2016 in this top left graph here. And this is basically abundance over time, proportion of the maximum on the y-axis here. And these are, all these different lines are from different data sets, and they're all indicating a decline. We've also seen some diet and trophic level shifts in red snapper from before and after DWH. We've seen density and habitat shifts in big epipelagic and pelagic species, whereas before DWH, the blue marlin, I believe it was, these were its densities and habitats throughout the Gulf of Mexico. And after DWH, they witnessed that they've kind of moved over to the west. In a recent study that was just published this year, we looked at PAHs and pathological changes in red snapper, and we're seeing 99% of the fish that we looked at had pathological changes in the liver, which is an indication of chronic exposure. Again, we've been drilling in the Gulf for 70 plus years. So over time, we're going to see some sublethal impacts, and the issue here is this a signal of disease progression in red snapper? We did see other pathological changes that were declining, but along with these increasing pathological changes, we also seen some other health indicators that were declining over time in golden tilefish, as well as groupers and red snappers. And I think really, we'll close that out. So my biggest concern is that, one, I think you need baseline data. If anybody's anywhere you're gonna start to drill, is collect baseline data so you have something that you compare to after there's an incident. And two, again, I think, some of the baseline data, I was able to find some early studies back in the 70s and 80s that was looking at PAHs in fish, but they were mostly inshore fish. So I've had a hard time finding comparables for offshore species. And we're part of the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, and we've been working on more decadal synthesis of all the data. We just had another paper published on the coastal, where we're doing ecozones, basically, like the coastal impacts synthesis over the last 10 years, offshore impacts. And from the study of the coastal impacts, we're seeing there's a huge variation in impacts, and it's going to be related to environmental factors, species specific, age, reproductive status, spawning status. And so there's a wide variation in their vulnerability and the resilience of these species. So it's really important to have as much baseline data as you can and document before the abundances, the diversity, and the levels, pH levels in the environment prior to drilling. So with that, I'll take questions. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, those were definitely eye-opening graphs, especially as a fisherman in Florida. I mean, the species you listed, it's like you hit all the top species that are just as important to our East Coast as well. And so many of those, like the marlin, probably other similar pelagic like sailfish and mahi, they just all we share the waters with the Bahamas. I mean, like I pointed out before, from my door, it's about 70 miles at the west end. It's, 2 or 3 hour boat ride, depending on your boat. So
I just like to point out that, one, the blue marlin is our national fish in the Bahamas. Two, the Nassau grouper, the Bahamas has the last sustainable Nassau grouper fishery in this region. So it's gone economically extinct in all the other areas. So you can't, just go and jump out of your boat and get a whole bunch of Nassau grouper. So seeing those species is really important, I think, and it puts it into context, especially with how much we use sport fishing in our tourism economy, how much we consume Nassau grouper inside our day-to-day life and activity. But one of the things that you didn't show was the invertebrates and how well invertebrates entrain those toxins into their bodies and how that affects their development. And the Bahamas, we just got the Marine Stewardship Council certified our spiny lobster fishery. So now, how do you justify risking this fishery that's now being marketed as a sustainable fishery that takes into account these human socioeconomic impacts, the environmental sustainability of it? And if you have those toxins inside that fishery that these fishermen have just spent a decade trying to get it, labeled and listed, and now you're risking it like that. And then in the island of Andros in particular, land crabs are $1 million industry. So this is a very small community, but they have crabs for computers. People go in the bush and they catch these land crabs and they sell them, and they bought computers for their kids in their schools. That shows this tie straight through our social networks and our economies and our environment. And you're risking it for something that's going to give you pennies on the dollar, that's unreliable, that's dangerous, and isn't just going to impact the environment, but this is people's lives that we're talking about. When you have crab that we eat all the time, and then you have the cancer risks and stuff in the Bahamas, nobody got money to pay for cancer. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Certain species stand out too. Like it's not always about fishing, but I'm certainly a dedicated fly fisherman, and I see your maps of Andros, and I just think about one, that seagrass, which here in the Lake Worth Lagoon, we're fighting tooth and nail just to fight scraps of it. And then, Andros is such a good site for it. And to put that at risk and to put fish like bonefish, which, I know how much fly fishermen spend on guides in Andros. There's so many legendary guides in Andros, and it's its own, that fish is its own economy. So to put that at risk for something that's already proving to be not economically feasible, it's just kind of ridiculous.
And they know it. The bonefish guides, they've really signed on, and you can see in that list of supporters, there are lots of bonefish guides there. But one of the tragedies that we're experiencing in the Bahamas right now, that island of Andros and the Berry Islands, Bimini, Freeport, it's really hard for you to find their representatives, their government representatives, saying anything publicly about oil exploration in the Bahamas. And this is something that we're really challenging everyone in the Bahamas and outside of the Bahamas. Talk to your representative, call them, email them, text them, WhatsApp them, ask them to say specifically where they stand. Rashema?
I just wanted to jump in there because that's such a huge point. The fact that we have elected officials who should definitely be the voice for the people on the ground. And we have over 40 members of parliament who should be speaking on behalf of the people of the Bahamas. And there was a question in the chat where I think it was Drew Martin asked whether or not this could be stopped in the courts. And so I want to tie in again what Dr. Davis was saying about our elected officials. They really should be the ones who should be petitioning this in the House of Parliament to stop this drilling from having to get to this point where they actually drilled and they drilled for 48 days. But I just want to reiterate the point that Save the Bays and Waterkeepers Bahamas did make application for a judicial review proceedings, and we have been able to at this point get leave to proceed with hopes of moving on to trial. And one of the things that the company did, Bahamas Petroleum Company, to prevent us from justice in the court system was to make application for security for costs. And this is one of the tools that they've been using in the past to prevent small grassroots organizations like Waterkeepers Bahamas, like Save the Bays, from being heard on a strong and arguable case. It's just so sad to see that you have these groups who are asking you to do the right thing and to look at the process that's in place through our legislation, and for us to be able to have transparency to see whether or not they took the right steps, whether or not they went through the Planning and Subdivisions Act and they followed those regulations, whether they followed the Ministry of the Environment's regulations through the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection. And so we're only asking for the courts to allow us to see the transparent documents, as well as to be able to make a determination of that. And they're preventing that by asking for security for costs. And so that's one way that we are handling this matter from the Bahamian perspective. But I want to bring it again to South Florida again. South Florida is also at risk if the Bahamas Petroleum Company intends on requesting renewal of license agreements or for another permit to do another well. We're not out of the clear because they made the announcement yesterday about abandoning that well. We don't want them to have an opportunity to have renewed licenses or to drill another well again. So South Florida, I'm hoping that you're paying attention to what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And to, add to that and the continued Jews question, I think we're well represented in Bahamian courts with Rashema and Waterkeeper and Save the Bay. As far as us as Floridians, we're a little bit more limited because we are talking about international law, and there's jurisdiction concerns and whatnot. But we're taking on this role with Our Islands, Our Future to organize this Floridian voice. And there's kind of two ways of doing it. If you're an individual, I'll post a link in the comments. We have that petition that we're up to 93,000. There's plenty of Floridians that we can, just with Lake Worthians, we can get it over 100,000, I feel like. So please share that petition with everyone. As a private citizen, you can, those are powerful. If you have 100,000+ people, and especially if a good portion of that are Floridians and Americans also standing up to this, the Prime Minister and his deputies will hopefully start paying attention. And then the other side of that too, beyond if the private citizen in a petition, we also have that opposition letter, and posting that link in the comments as well. And we're looking for 3 specific stakeholders in Florida, right? The big ones are, if you're a municipal government, think about, you represent a municipality, you're an elected official, and in your local government, you have this beautiful South Florida beach and all the industry, all the hotels, all the restaurants. We're in Palm Beach County. Last time I checked, we have 2 industries: it's tourism and agriculture. We're not exactly manufacturing anything here. The vast majority of our population is employed by tourism and hospitality. This is huge. If, when Deepwater happened, that happened hours away from here, from a drive on a totally other coast. And here on this coast in Palm Beach County, and even in the Keys, we were feeling a downturn in tourism, because people in other places, they just see it on the news and they say, well, all of Florida looks like that. Why in the world would I want to go down there? So we have this opposition letter organized, municipalities. We want also businesses. If you own any of those affected businesses, whether it's hotels, restaurants, think about any kind of connection. You rely on tourism. You need clean water. You need clean beaches. You should really consider signing on to our opposition letter. And of course, when you click on that link, there's a couple emails there. You can always reach out with questions or comments if you have more. And so with that, do we have any more questions? I see this really great comment here from somebody. Now is the time to extinguish these leases. We don't need to prospect or speculate on the value of our marine resources. I think, that's huge. Like even a place like Lake Worth Lagoon, where I spent, quite a few years guiding and diving and whatnot, and certain species like our sea turtles and diving. I mean, people come from all over the world to see those. Our fisheries, of course, and just even clean beaches. People come from all over, and we just don't want to compromise that. It's really difficult to put an economic value on certain things like bonefish and permit and mahi and all these fish that go out into the pelagic zone. I mean, we have our commercial quotas, we have certain numbers, but there's so much more beyond that in terms of the value it brings to our cultures as Bahamians and South Floridians.
Right. So the person that made that comment just now is Eric Carey, and he's the executive director of the Bahamas National Trust. And they're responsible for managing that west side of Andros National Park that I showed you guys earlier. That is the biggest national park in our country. That island is the biggest island in our nation. And when you think about the impact that one oil spill in that area can have, it's ridiculous. I wanted to call back to what you were talking about earlier about this international jurisdiction and legislation arena that you'd be dealing with if there was an oil spill. Doc Rogers mentioned it, and this like tri-national border where you have Cuba, the Bahamas, and the United States could be impacted. Firstly, in the Constitution of the Bahamas, any senator or representative in government that has a significant conflict of interest is actually supposed to say it. They're supposed to divulge that to the Speaker of the House before they accept a position as a minister or as a senator. And it would be really interesting for us to see when those things were mentioned or when they were published or gazetted or whatever they need to do for us to see the ministers who were involved in granting BPC their licenses in the first place. And the senator that actually works for BPC, the former senator that is on their directorship, just knowing like when did their relationship start with BPC and if there was any overlap with their responsibilities in government, if they had any voting responsibilities on issues that had to do with BPC, that's a really tough question. And then when we went over to respond to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we were very particular about training Bahamians on how to maintain this chain of custody for oil, that if we did find oil on the Key Sal Bank, we'd have to get it, collect it, label it, and all this stuff, so that if we came to an international court of law to try to get money from British Petroleum for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, there was so much to go through. And I'm just thinking, what would be the logistic nightmare that you would have to go through from Florida to squeeze the blood out of the stone of this little rinky-dink oil exploration company to get any resultant insurance money. The Waterkeepers and Save the Bays judicial review is trying to find out, what is the license agreement? How much insurance are they supposed to have? And the government is being really shady on that. And so that's really difficult for us.
Yeah, Reinaldo, I don't know how much time we have, but these are so many good points that are coming forward, because even though BPC has said that they have abandoned that well, the point that needs to be made is whether or not that was properly sealed, and whether or not we need to ensure that there are insurances that are beyond the point of just capping that seal. Will this insurance policy be for another 3 months or another year, just to guarantee that even if there are spills that may occur afterwards, we have the proper mechanisms in place to prevent the Bahamian people, the fishermen, the small bonefish resorts from having to clean up that mess. And Dr. Davis made the point about having the human capacity in country to be able to attend to any oil spills. And I'm on Grand Bahama Island, and we experienced Dorian, and not only did we experience Dorian, we experienced the Equinox spill at the same time. And so we're here in February of 2021, and again, we're still dealing with the issue of the Equinox spill, and whether or not there's oil or there is no oil, whether or not there is going to be an active remediation plan to repair the area that was damaged by the oil spill. There are so many questions that are still yet unanswered by the company and by the proper governmental authorities who should be answering these questions for the people in that community, as well as the persons on the island who may be affected by the quality of the water that might have been compromised, by the wetlands that might have been compromised. And we had so many good information shared to us by both doctors about the impacts of the fisheries industry, which the Bahamas, again, when you look at what's at risk, you have a $7.8 billion annual revenue that comes in from tourism, that comes in from fisheries. We eat red. Red snapper. Doctor just said our national fish is the blue marlin. So there are so many things that the government of the Bahamas needs to be responding to when it comes to whether or not there are certain things in place to prevent any types of license agreements from being renewed, as well as what is their plan of action to put that moratorium on oil drilling in the Bahamas.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question from Drew about why is the government not cooperating? And I think I can answer that. So, Prime Minister Minnis, and if you want to read our opposition letter that we have available to sign on as a stakeholder, um, Prime Minister has actually spoken sort of against this drilling. He has said he opposes it, and he can't imagine. It's a nightmare. If there was an accident, this would just be a tragedy. However, I think it's really important that we as Floridians help our Bahamian neighbors on this fight, because if we collectively put our voice together, if the Prime Minister knows that this is wrong, he has taken steps actively to keep these projects going. Um, and if he's not going to listen to the Bahamians themselves, then I think we as Floridians, we really need to kind of step up to the plate and help our neighbors out with a collective voice, because he's not going to be able to ignore us. I mean, our economies are so just, so tied together directly in every possible way, that relationship just needs to be maintained. And so it's really important that you sign on, either to the petition if you're a citizen individual, or to the opposition letter if you're a stakeholder, and also share that with people, share those links with everyone who has even the slightest connection to our waters. And that could be anything from their fishermen, their divers. They like to go to the beach. They like to go to our hotels. They're tourists. They like to go to, our restaurants, and just so much is dependent on this.
I would also like to ask anyone who has the capacity to donate. There's the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund. There's Waterkeepers. There's Save the Bays. If you can donate, one of the biggest things that's keeping us from environmental justice now are these paywalls. And so the judicial review right now, all BPC did was, after the Bahamian government said, okay, we're not gonna make y'all pay any security for costs. And as soon as the Bahamian government put down that security for cost charge, BPC said, oh, no, let us jump into this judicial review. They got permission to be a part of the judicial review, and then they immediately asked for this security for cost. And that's one of the ways that major polluters and really affluent people can take advantage of these less affluent communities and conservationists to say, you have to pay for justice. And that's a $200,000 security that you have to just come up with. And in the Bahamas, a lot of us conservationists and environmentalists are doing a lot of this work basically out of pocket, hand to mouth. The government also claimed that it was an ironclad legal agreement, which Eric Carey is commenting now. But the thing is, you have an ironclad agreement when you're in an emergency situation like we currently are. You have force majeure that can say you can't drill for oil right now, or you can't drill for oil because it's hurricane season, or you can't drill for oil because, some terrorist action is happening. Right now, we're recovering from the effects of Hurricane Dorian. That was like 60% of our economy almost got wiped out. Then you have COVID, which took away our tourism economy for almost the entire year last year. And now you want to drill for oil. If things come in threes and we have a leak, that's going to be virtually impossible for us to recover. And Doc Rogers already said the logistics for getting over there and actually doing something reasonable to stop the oil is ridiculous. It would be impossible for our little country to do anything like that, and even much less right now after Dorian and COVID. So why couldn't the government say, oh, you know what? This is just a bad time. Y'all go sit down, relax yourself, and y'all could come back in the next 50 years. Like, don't ever come back. But if you want to really, really come back, try us again in 50 years. But now is not the time.
Thank you so much, panelists. I know I personally, this is important to me. I want to go over there. I want to throw flies at bonefish. I want to go dive West End. I still want to do that stuff, and it must be protected. So let's go through each of you. And if you have, what's your 30-second one-liner that you want to tell Floridians that's going to get them fired up to be involved in this? Anyone can go first.
Well, unless you want to see oil on your coastlines, you might want to think about it and sign the petition. Not just oil, but the view of platforms all along the coast.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that this is imminent and substantial endangerment. I mean, this is something that there is no recovery. You have a spill of this magnitude in the sensitive areas. The ecological processes that go on. A spray, disperse it, and clean up the beaches strategy is just not suitable. You're looking at the entire destruction of your economic and your cultural base, and the probability is high, even with their own modeling. And then they're modeling only a 12,000 barrel release. Let's get real. That we have to really focus on what is the probability and the fact that there's just no way to respond.
Florida, we are brothers and sisters. We're right across from each other. It will only take a boat ride. And so we are asking you, our brothers and sisters, for as much help as possible. We have had great organizations like the Bahamas National Trust, like Earth Care, like Science and Perspective, Waterkeepers Bahamas, who have worked for decades to put systems in place, marine protected areas, work that Brief has done over the years and decades. Do not let that work go to vain. We need your help. You're going to be affected. All of our beaches are going to be affected by it. Oil drilling is a dirty and dangerous industry, and we don't need that. We need sunshine, beaches, and we need beautiful crystal clear waters. So here again, we need your help.
Yeah, I'm going to take it a little bit more dark. Florida, it doesn't matter how really nice your lawn is and your borders and everything is. If our septic tank starts leaking, it's going to be on your front lawn. So we really get together and recognize that we share an ocean. This isn't the ocean, the fish, the lobster. They don't understand boundaries. So what's yours is ours. What's ours is yours. And if we have garbage going on in our sea, it's going to be on your beaches.
I'd like to follow up on Dr. Davis, because what you did say there was about our lawns and our oceans. So let's not forget that oil is not the only thing in our waters. The pesticides that you fertilize your lawn is entering in our waters. PCBs, all anthropogenic pollution, Teflon, perfluorinated compounds for your convenient nonstick pots and pans. These are just as serious of compounds that we are now finding in our waters and in our fish in Tampa Bay and throughout the Gulf. So be aware of what you consume and you're putting into our environment, because remember, you are eating it and you are what you eat.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that's a perfect closer, because, follow your local water keepers, because a lot of what was just mentioned in terms of lawns, chemicals, pesticides, you are what you eat. We cover all those issues for sure, which is why this is just right on par. So thank you so much, panelists. We hope to post this video to our Facebook page, to a YouTube page, and so on, so that it can be infinitely shareable, just like the links for the petition and for the letter. So please share. Follow along follow your local waterkeepers, follow Save the Bays, follow all Science Perspective, all these great organizations to stay updated on this issue, because I can guarantee you we're not going to give up until we get the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you.